ahead and officially get things started.
You're on, Mark.
All right, well, welcome everyone to the National FairTax webinar. I'm your host, Mark Maneri, joined by my colleagues Larry Walters and Elaine Malero, and we're excited to have you here tonight, and thank you for spending an hour out of your evening, especially right before the Thanksgiving holiday. It's a busy time of year, and the fact that you took an hour out away from all of the madness to be with us tonight is a beautiful thing, and it says a lot about you and your commitment to doing your civic duty and just staying educated. And that's what we're here to do, is to educate about the fair tax. So let's go ahead and jump in. And as a reminder, you have an opportunity to write in all your questions, and we want them at the bottom of your control panel. So please don't be shy. Write in as many as you'd like. All right. So as you can see on the screen, we've got a tax code that isn't really working for us. It's over 75,000 pages now as of 2015, and there isn't a single individual that can handle this size tax code. It's broken. We know it's broken. The citizens know it's broken. The politicians know it's broken, and yet here we are with this same albatross that we've had for years. It just keeps piling up on itself. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. One, because we've got a business called the United States of America that runs on trillions of dollars, and systematically changing the way we generate its revenue seems a little bit risky to people. So we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. And the other reason is because there's 535 people in Washington, D.C., many of which that actually like this tax code. Now, I'll get in a little bit later on what I mean by that, but unfortunately, it happens to be the very thing that allows our politicians to operate in a way that has us not know what they're up to. And if you can believe it, they like that idea. So we've got to make some changes here. And so this fair tax is not only a more brilliant way to fund our country and create an economic boom, it also creates transparency. And that's one of the things we love to say, is that the fair tax is simple and it's transparent. And we'll talk more about that as well. So there's 7 pillars around having a healthy tax system, revenue generating system for any government. And what you're going to see on the page right now are the 7 opposites of what a healthy system would have. So our current system is convoluted, it inspires the wrong behavior, there's no transparency, it's incredibly inefficient, it impedes our privacy, of course. There's winners and losers based on who you know and how much you got in your bank account, and it's very laborious, which gets in the way of business owners actually investing their time, energy, and resources back into their products and businesses to make them better. So we've got a solution for that. It's called the Fair Tax, HR 25, as you can see up here, and S155. This is legislation, ladies and gentlemen, that exists right now and has existed for many years, and it's not new to our politicians. And we've got to get more co-sponsors, which we'll talk about a little bit later on as well. So the Fair Tax is legislation. It's a brilliant piece of legislation, and I'll say this about it. $22 million of research went into creating the Fair Tax Plan. And many of the countries, or really the world's foremost economists, contributed to creating this thing. And the mandate that we're given is, what would be the most progressive, fair, simple tax system that would not only neutrally fund our federal government, but would create an economic stimulus that every single American and business owner would benefit from. This is what they came up with. So let's talk about simplicity. 131 pages, double space, people. Now compare that to 75,000, and yeah, you've got a document that if you download it on your own, you could read this thing and make heads and tails of it. So it's very simple. Now, The fair tax supports growth. So let's talk about this. The fair tax is a consumption tax or a sales tax, not an income tax. You only pay taxes on what you spend, not on what you earn. And the fair tax would repeal the 16th Amendment and would eliminate not only the income tax, the personal income tax, but corporate income taxes, capital gains taxes, the estate tax, death tax, alternative minimum tax, Social Security tax, all payroll tax withholdings. And what you've got yourself is a very, very simple system that inspires the right behavior. Now, what do we mean by this, inspiring the right behavior? Well, think about it. If the more you make, the more gets taken away, what you've got is something that inspires the wrong behavior, which is hoarding and shielding. And instead of all-out growth, business owners actually pause to think about how too much growth has a negative impact on it because the government's going to take a bunch more away. We don't want any business owner thinking that for the sake of growing our economy in the healthiest and most organic way. No, we want people thinking, boy, how do I grow this thing? And as a result, with substantial and quantum growth, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to have jobs created. You're going to have people making more money. When people make more money, they spend more. And when they spend more, businesses thrive. And it's this very healthy cycle that we want. Well, the current income tax stifles that. And so if you look at the fair tax, which is a sales tax, so what we're doing here is we're literally getting rid of all income taxes and all the other taxes that I mentioned before, and replacing it with one sales tax, one national retail sales tax. Well, what are the benefits of that? So for starters, there's a lot of wealthy business owners and wealthy individuals and businesses, period, that take all of their profits, their wealth, and they park it overseas and offshore to shield it from capital gains taxes and personal and corporate income taxes. That's estimated at $13 trillion, and when fair tax gets implemented, that's going to flow back into our economy. So the U.S. becomes a corporate headquarter haven. We'll have the lowest corporate income tax rate of any country in the world, 0. And if you think about it, think about how relevant this is. There are companies right now, many of them, that are moving their international headquarters, their corporate headquarters, to countries like Ireland that have low corporate tax rates, and it's a real deal. Like, they save quite a bit of money on their corporate income taxes, so they're moving infrastructure away. Jobs are going away as a result of this. So companies are going to be coming over here like mad to open up their businesses to save money on their corporate taxes, corporate income taxes. And that's going to mean building and construction and jobs and infrastructure and hiring, and boy, what a boon that's going to be to the economy. And of course, we've got an underground economy estimated $2 trillion that pays their fair share, and these are people that are currently avoiding the tax system right now. So we've got a lot of benefits, and we'll talk about a little bit more of them later on, but wow, look at what's happening here, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a new way to fund our federal government that's going to create a huge amount of jobs, and $1 trillion is going to flow back into our economy organically. I mean, that's just a brilliant thing. So there's no loopholes in the fair tax. I mean, think about what right now. You've got this just right now, we've got all kinds of different taxes and all kinds of different loopholes, right? Well, the fair tax is just one tax, a consumption tax on new retail goods and services. There's no tax on used goods. And there's no fair tax levied on business-to-business transactions. So one of the examples I like to use in this is a home builder. Home builder is a business, and when it buys its inputs to go build a home from all the different suppliers, no fair tax is levied. It's exempt. When they sell that new product, that new home, to the consumer for the first time, the fair tax is levied, and that business collects the fair tax and sets it aside for the government to collect. Well, once that homeowner lived in it for several years and then they go sell it to another homeowner, no fair tax. It's considered a used good, and from now on, for the rest of the lifetime existence of that home, no fair tax is levied. So what's the rate? What's the rate? 23%. 23% national retail sales tax on all receipts. So, all right, so we become much more efficient with the fair tax. So first of all, 45 states currently have a sales tax, a state sales tax. We get to leverage that infrastructure to collect the national sales tax. And now instead of collecting from 120 million households, we collect from 18 million businesses. We get over 80% more efficient. That's a smart thing. There's only one form to fill out. Really simple. What were your gross sales or gross receipts to a business? Multiply that times 23%, and that's how much the business puts forth to the government every month or every quarter. So really, really simple. And of course, we Americans, we pay the fair tax every time we go into the store and we buy something. And we've got a broad tax base. Every single American, whether we go to the grocery store, whether we go to the mall, whether we're buying a new home or a new car, or we're getting our teeth cleaned and we're getting a medical procedure done, or we're getting our business looked after by an accountant who's helping us put together some financial projections. All these services and every new good that we purchase, every time we do it, we pay the fair tax to the tune of 23%. The business collects it, they set aside, and they hand it off to the federal government. Now, we'll talk about the impact on pricing in just a little bit, but people go, whoa, 23% on top of what we've got going on right now, does that mean prices are going to go up by that much? And the answer is no, because remember, we get rid of what we call the embedded tax, or excuse me, the embedded cost. We'll talk about that, and of course, we don't have any more income taxes anymore. We don't have to pay those puppies. All right. Now, if you look at our current system, the IRS costs $13 billion to operate. That would go away because the IRS is going to be eliminated after 3 years. And they're collecting about 80% of what it should. And the tax gap, as you see, is approximately $450 billion. We would eliminate the IRS within a 3-year period and get exponentially more efficient. All right. We protect our privacy. You pay your taxes when you make a purchase. You don't have to fill out any detailed income tax form. The government doesn't know how much money you make, nor should they. You don't have to put together all of your receipts every year. You don't have to keep track of all that stuff. You don't have to waste, if you're a business owner, all kinds of time thinking about tax implications, which it's estimated in that aggregate is of that time spent around tax implications is billions of dollars. Imagine if all the businesses collectively put that back into making their products and businesses bigger and better. So with our current tax system, there's winners and losers. And if you recall the last presidential election, there was a big scuttlebutt about this, where Mitt Romney had a lower effective tax rate than most Americans. Here the guy's a billionaire, and he's paying not necessarily less in taxes, but a lower rate than many middle-class Americans. Well, how is that possible? Because he's got the contacts and he's got the deep pockets to hire the right people that can figure out all the loopholes in the 75,000 pages. And it takes an army to do it, but for a guy like him, it pays off. That's totally unfair. I mean, that's not a level playing field. So with the fair tax, you've got fairness. And in addition to leveling the playing field by simply saying, hey, you're only going to pay taxes when you go spend. You can go easily figure that out. We've also created what we call the prebate, which assures that no one, not anybody in the United States of America, regardless of how much money they make, pays taxes up to the poverty level. No one. So the prebate issues a rebate in advance. And we'll show you how this works. So if you move your eyes to the right side of the screen and you scroll down to the green section, imagine a family, a 2-adult household with 2 kids. The Department of Health and Human Services has created this this matrix, this the poverty level limit matrix, and they've determined what the poverty level spending thresholds are. And what they say is based on the size of your household. If you look at that annual consumption allowance, well, those are the numbers they suggest that a household would be spending at the poverty level. So in other words, a married couple or a 2-adult household with 2 children, so 4 people in the household, if they spend $31,000 a year, that means they're spending at poverty level. So what they've done is they said, okay, if they're spending at $31,000 at the poverty level limit, and you multiply that number times 23%, you get $7,328, and you divide that number by the 12 months of the year, you get $611. And $611 will be direct deposited into every qualifying family's household, a family of 4, or 2-adult household, family of 4, at the beginning of each month, and it reimburses them for that amount of fair tax that they would be paying over the course of that month. And it's just a brilliant thing. Like, it's very simple. You're getting reimbursed for poverty level limit spending, and this assures that no one pays the fair tax up to the poverty level limit. And this is really important to understand, because a lot of Democrats or anyone who opposes the fair tax or who demagogues it will say, oh, the fair tax, you know, that's really bad for low-income class Americans. No, it's not. The prebate assures nobody pays fair tax on the poverty level spending. Plus, they can save money on used goods by purchasing used goods. Plus, they get this prebate every month. Plus, they're going to take home 100% of their paycheck, and the average American's paycheck is going to go up by, on average, 29%. So that's a huge windfall for all Americans, especially lower-income class Americans. So we've got so many reasons why the fair tax is a great idea. All right, now let's talk about prices. So here's the deal, guys. The businesses right now pass their income taxes, their corporate income taxes, and their compliance costs, their cost to comply to the current income tax code, off to the customer. You know, when they do their profit and loss statement, they show their taxes and their cost to comply to taxes as line item expenses. And so they factor that in when they price out their product or service. And every time we buy it, we essentially pay for it. And that's just smart business. So if you think about that, since we're paying not only an income tax right now and a sales tax, which we call the embedded tax, that comes out to about 22%. So in other words, when we go to the store and we buy something for $100 right now, 22% of the cost is a business's income tax and their compliance costs. We're paying that. It's reflected in the price that we pay on any good or service at the retail level. Really important to understand that. So what happens is when the fair tax gets passed and all these income away and the compliance costs go away, well, the embedded costs go away. So the 22% comes out, and the fair tax of 23% gets inserted or put in. So what does that mean? Does that mean it's a wash? Does that mean prices are going to stay the same? No, it's a fairly complex issue. There's a lot of math involved, but the experts suggest that prices are going to go up by about perhaps 10% in the first year. Now you think, wow, 10% pricing increase across the board. Oh my gosh, wow. Well, guess what? There's no more gross and net pay. If you were making $5,000 a month gross and taking home $3,900, guess what? After the fair tax gets passed, you now take home $5,000. Your income went up significantly. Plus, you're not paying taxes anymore on your income. And there's no withholdings, as I just mentioned. So even if prices go up by 10% or even a little bit more than that, you're making way more money, 25 to 30% increase minimum on your take-home pay, and you're not paying taxes anymore. So you come out way ahead financially when we implement the fair tax. All right. So if the fair tax inspires the right behavior, if everybody comes out financially ahead better, businesses and individuals, and there's a boom to our economy because of people having more disposable income than ever before, are going to go spend money, they're going to go invest money, and when that happens, the businesses thrive, and as they thrive, they grow and expand and hire more people. More people get jobs, and they make money, and they save money, and they spend it. And it's this really beautiful cycle that occurs. Well, why wouldn't anybody want this to happen? Because if your income and your power right now comes from the current tax code, you feel threatened. And that's what's happening right now by 50% of lobbyists who are tax lobbyists and politicians. So let's unpack this for a second. I said earlier that politicians like our tax code right now. Do you know why? Because they have things that they need to go, that legislation they bring to the table, and little projects for their district they bring to the table, and quid quo pro that they need to reciprocate for their buddy, and they need to pay for these things. So to justify it, what do? They go and they manipulate a piece of the tax code that we, the American people, never know about. And as a result, it frees up some money over there, and then they go pay for it. So it allows them to operate in shadow. And the fair tax creates massive transparency. It really transfers the power back to the people, because like when you go to the store and you buy something, you're going to see right on the receipt, national retail sales tax, 23%. And if that number is different, well, we're going to raise hell. And we're going to call our elected officials and say, hey, you can't do this. So the transparency is extraordinary. And of course, politicians don't like that because they like to operate in shroud. So that's what's happening here, guys. And plus, with lobbyists who contribute massively to re-election campaigns, typically what they do is they say, hey, vote for us in this favor, or manipulate this or that, or we're going to contribute to your re-election campaign. Well, one thing that lobbyists are saying is, don't support the fair tax. Well, why would they say that? Well, 50% of lobbyists are tax lobbyists, and if corporate income taxes go away, we don't have a need for tax lobbyists anymore. They're threatened. So the only reason why somebody wouldn't like the fair tax is because they feel threatened by it. And those who feel threatened are up on the screen right now, and these are people that are thinking pretty darn selfishly. So we've got to make our decision around what are the important factors around how we choose to support and vote. And for me personally, I make it about the fair tax. If you support it, become a co-sponsor of the bill, you can get my vote. If you're not supporting it, I can't vote for you. So that's how we yield or wield our power as citizens. All right. So those are the main fair tax points, and we've got a bunch of questions written in. Thank you for doing that. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to work on some of your questions, and then we'll do our special topic, and then we will go back to finishing up with your questions. Okay. I'll ask my colleague Larry to unmute himself. So Larry, this comes in from Cheryl. Why aren't more of our GOP Republican candidates for the presidency not supporting the fair tax? Larry, can you speak to that at all?
Sure. You actually answered that question during your presentation, Mark. And the reason is that they, like those that are incumbent in Washington right now, are trying to protect the goose that lays their golden eggs. They don't want to get rid of an income tax, no matter what form they present it in, because of the benefits that they have financially and the fact that through an income tax, they can control us, the people. They can force us to take actions that we may not normally take. Mark?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for the added color. And this is a kind of a build off from Cheryl's question from John, who asks, is there any way to move from our current system to the fair tax gradually, or does it have to be all at once? So, John, I'll speak to that, and then Larry, if you want to fill in any gaps, feel free to. But you know, if you recall in our last election, Herman Cain had his 999 program, where we'd go to a 9% personal income tax across the board, 9% corporate income tax, and a 9% national sales tax. And some people thought that was a good idea, but here's the problem with it. It's a big, big risk. Why? Because when you do it that way, without including the legislation to repeal the 16th Amendment and outlaw Congress's ability to tax our income, you've got a very slippery slope. And once you start with a 999 and you've got Congress collecting money on multiple fronts, there's going to be a lot of them that aren't going to be really keen on eliminating one of those fronts. So it's a big risk to do it that way, this gradual way to do it, the way Herman Cain suggested. And the fair tax, really eliminates that risk. So, Larry, anything else on that?
No, Mark, that was fine.
Yeah. Okay, Arnold asks, how will we get rid of state and local taxes, and state income taxes, etc.? So, everything, well, look, how do we get the fair tax implemented? Ultimately, it's grassroots, it's our vote. I'll talk more about that in the second half of our presentation here. The same is likely true, Arnold, but one thing I just want to be clear about is the fair tax does not have an impact on, a direct impact on state and local income taxes or property taxes or anything like that. However, right now, two states, Florida and Texas, is it Florida and Texas, Florida and California? Florida and California operate with a state sales tax but no income tax. And I'll speak for Florida because I live here. We have a thriving economy and budget, and it is a demonstration, it is an example to suggest that a sales tax without an income tax has quite a bit of merit. And so what probably will happen, Arnold, is if we go nationally to a sales tax without and eliminate an income tax, then likely the states will follow suit. But to be clear, there's no direct impact. Once we go to the fair tax, any state sales tax or income taxes will still be in place unless those state governments change it. Question from David, did you say that real estate would be subject to the fair tax? Yes, I did. So those paying rent, so that's a service every month, would be, the fair tax would be included in the rent every month. Every time a home builder sells a new home for the first time as a new good, the fair tax would be levied. All right.
Mark?
Yes.
It should be pointed out that renters are paying property taxes now on the rent that they pay. And if they're in a state that has an income tax, and that landlord has to pay tax on his income, the renter is paying that also through whatever the rent fee is. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Don, for writing in that I was correct in Texas. Texas does not have a state income tax, but California does. Thank you. All right. If we no longer pay taxes, how is Medicare funded, asked Mike. Well, guess what, Mike? We do pay taxes with the fair tax. In fact, the fair tax is revenue neutral. It will collect at least the same amount of money in the first year as our current tax system does, and much more in subsequent years because the economy is going to grow. So quite frankly, the fair tax is a solution to funding Medicare, and that, for that matter, Medicaid, and for that matter, Social Security, because we're going to have more money to do it with. But let's be clear, what we are paying taxes. In fact, everybody pays taxes, Mike, and that's the beauty of the fair tax. See, right now in our current tax code, actually only 50% of people are paying taxes because of all the deductibles and blah, 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 all the loopholes and stuff that's in that 75,000 tax code. But with the fair tax, it's a broad base, meaning everybody pays their fair share depending on how much they spend. So that's how Medicare gets funded. If I buy a piece of land, is the fair tax levied on it? I would say no to that because I don't think there's any land right now that hasn't been resold before, be considered a used good. If you're buying it for business purposes, it would be credited back to you. Larry, did I think about that correctly?
Yeah, I think you have, Mark. It's going along with one of the cornerstones that there's no double taxation. Tax has more than likely been paid on the land previously.
Yep. So Cheryl wants to know, how do we stop the special interest groups from undermining the fair tax? Larry, do you want to speak to that?
The only way we can do that is with our vote. And our vote that means getting rid of or scaring to advocate for the fair tax our local representatives and United States senators. The power we have is in our vote, but we have to unify it. And that's what our grassroots is all about, is getting people understanding the fair tax and understanding that they need to be communicating with their representative officials to get them to either support the fair tax or replacing them. Otherwise, being a free country, there's nothing we can do directly to circumvent the lobbyists. In fact, even after the fair tax is implemented, I would guess that lobbyists will still be trying to get some exemptions put into the system. And we as people will have to be alert to what's going on in Congress so that we can help avoid that. Mark?
Yeah. Thank you, Larry. So Shirley says, one who rents would be paying fair tax and also property tax? That's incorrect. So yes, fair tax, because it's a service. Renting an apartment or a house is a service. And of course, the property owner would be responsible for collecting that fair tax.
However, Mark, because
but not property tax. The owner of the property pays property.
Right.
What's that?
The state, because the property tax is a state issue and the owner is paying it, the owner will be, the owner's rent amount will include his compensation for that. It won't be an extra line item that is charged to the renter, but whatever the rent amount is, that includes some amount to pay the property taxes.
Yes, of course, as it would today.
Right. Well, even with the fair tax, because that's a state issue, that's a county issue, as opposed to a federal issue.
Correct. Yeah. So Shirley, if I think we dissected that okay. If you have any other questions on that, please write back in. Thank you for your question. If David asks, okay, we'll get back to that. So David asks, if a new house is taxed, won't that drive up the price of houses? Yeah, Larry, tackle that. Unpack that for David.
All right. First, don't forget that the embedded costs of that new house have gone away. So the actual cost of the house to be built under the fair tax is less than it is under the income tax. How much less is certainly debatable. And then the fair tax is added. Okay. Will the price of the new house be a little bit more? Yes. How much? as Mark noted earlier, maybe 10, 12, it could be 15%. We're not sure about that. Maybe even 17%. But the take-home pay that you get will more than compensate for that. Plus, the prebate untaxes you for all of the essentials up to the poverty level for your family size. So from a financial perspective, you as an individual or as a family have more purchasing power under the fair tax than you did under the income tax. But now here's the other thing. If the prices of new homes tend to go higher than what people feel it is worth, and they are leaning more toward going for the used home as opposed to the new home, even though there are people who, no matter what, will buy new, then the builders or whomever is marketing those new homes will start getting creative with special gifts. It could be large screen TVs or maybe totally wired for the internet and things of that nature. They'll put some added incentives into that home that are not available in used homes to help people make the decision, yeah, it's worth the extra money. And so it's going to be a marketing game, and it's going to be a game that's run by the purchaser, depending on what decisions we make and what kind of value we put on what's coming in the new home versus what can we get in a used home. Mark?
Yeah. So we've got a bunch more questions. Let's go to Brian's question, who's been really patient. Thank you, Brian. And this will be a good segue into our special topic that we'll move through quickly. It's a simple one. How would a future retiree's Social Security payments, Larry, be determined if the government is no longer collecting it as a specific tax?
Love the easy questions. Thank you. Once a year, Brian, your employer or yourself, if you are self-employed, will report to the Social Security Administration the gross wages paid. The purpose of that is so that when you qualify for your benefits, they have the numbers to develop what your benefit amount will be. Mark?
Yep, thank you. All right, so our special topic tonight, and we'll get to everybody's questions, so stay with us. The impact on seniors and retired people. And this is great because there's a lot of, our senior generation is really concerned right now about what's happening with our country and the direction that it's going. And, you know, the fair tax can really play a role in evolving us in a way that is, I believe, in line with our founding fathers' vision of this country. Now, that's my personal opinion. But we've got to evolve, and I think the implementation of the fair tax by allowing businesses to thrive, by not punishing that behavior, and giving people the opportunity, because they'll have more disposable income, to have more choice, is in line with what our founding fathers' vision was. Now, I've connected a lot of dots on that, but anyway, back to the point is I appreciate that there's a lot of seniors who are concerned about the direction that our country is going in, and the fair tax can help put us back on track with that. So let's see how it affects the senior generation. So let's look at the benefits specifically. So we've got the repealing of taxation on Social Security benefits and preserves purchasing power of Social Security benefits. Larry, do you want to explain what that means?
Sure. Under the income tax, Social Security benefits can be taxed if the retiree continues to work, which many do, and they will be paying, they will be having the withholding and their FICA taxes withheld from their paycheck also. That goes away under the fair tax. Since the fair tax taxes no form of income, no form of any kind of income. Rob a bank, it's not going to be taxed. We tax you when you spend. The way it will affect the seniors is pretty interesting. In fact, it leads to another question that was emailed in that I'm going to respond to here. Hank Van Geysen, who has been a longtime opponent of the FairTax. He's asked a couple of questions here, and I'm going to respond to them right now if I can, Mark.
Yeah.
First part is, why should senior retirees be forced to resume paying for their government retirement benefits with their sales tax dollars? Hank says, we paid in for 45 years or so and expected to receive our benefits without making any more contributions to the trust funds. The FairTax plan, in Hank's opinion, is a major government breach of faith with the millions of current retirees. Well, I happen to be one of those retirees also. I won't address that, but here's your answer, Hank, and to those of you who are participating with us tonight. Hank, as you have in the past, you've made points of elements of the fair tax out of context, and as many Democrat candidates have done when opposing a fair tax candidate in a congressional race, speak in partial truths to pose a negative situation about the fair tax. For example, you fail to mention that you, myself, and everyone else is paying an average of 22% more in embedded taxes for everything we buy today. Everything, much of which goes away under the fair tax. Secondly, today, even those who are virtually retired but continue working also pay the FICA taxes, 7.65% of their gross pay. And if their gross income is high enough, they also pay income taxes on their Social Security benefits in addition to their pre-tax pension plans. All of these taxes go away under the fair tax. Now, by the way, paying that tax on the Social Security is really a double taxation under today's income tax, because withholding tax was held when they earned the income that went toward their Social Security contribution. And if they're being taxed on Social Security benefits, they're being taxed on that income again. Also, retired people who are legal residents of this country with valid Social Security accounts get the family consumption allowance, what we call the prebate, meaning the lower income retirees have no fair tax liability and more than likely don't have Roth IRAs or other pre-tax type of pension benefits. Also, those who are in the middle income or higher, they'll have no fair tax liability up to their family size, just like everybody else. And if they're spending at twice the poverty threshold for their family, they would have an effective tax rate of only 11.5%, which is, Hank, less than the embedded taxes alone today that they pay at the cash register. And finally, to respond to this particular part of your questions, the COLA formula under the fair tax is modified so that no increase in prices due to the fair tax is felt by the retiree. And these are things that we all will benefit from if we are on any kind of federal benefit. So consider the sales tax paid, even though a portion is going to fund your Social Security today, Medicare, and Social Security disability, a lesser burden than today's embedded taxes in the price we pay for everything included, including our essentials. Also, the money we pay into Social Security, Medicare, etc., is not to pay our benefits, but the benefits of those receiving them while we work. Times have changed, and the system needs additional funds for those who will retire tomorrow. We all will be paying more in the future, whether we like it or not. And as for the second part of that first question, Hank, would it not have been more fair to issue all current retirees a card that allows them to purchase goods and services at a 15% tax rate rather than the 23% rate? That is not a goofy idea, except when it could be lobbied that we should not tax government consumption, even though they have been relieved of paying the employee taxes they pay under an income tax. Doing that would give them, the government, a financially favored position when competing in private industry with the services that they could provide. Furthermore, just one exemption, one special tax break, is the slippery slope to more. The crack in the door lobbyists need to play their game. So my answer is no, it would not be more fair to do as you suggest, Hank. Your second question was, why is it fair to double tax anyone's income, taxing savings when spent? Well, as I pointed out in my first comments to your first question, although you can look at it as double taxation, and really is not because of the taxes that are removed that are being paid now. So that's almost a clear wash. And additionally, with the embedded taxes going away, and that's one of the double taxation is one of the cornerstones of the fair tax, elimination of double taxation. So if you choose to look at it that way, that's certainly your choice. But we feel that in addition, with the addition of all of the other benefits of the fair tax and the fact that the little bit of tax that retirees who are spending after tax savings will be paying on their new purchases, it's a small price to pay compared to what they were paying previously, the embedded tax. Third question, how is it fair to actually increase the federal tax burden for millions of middle-class retirees? And Hank challenges us to check it out. Well, Hank, now you're telling untruths. As the research has shown and documented, under the fair tax, every taxpayer has a lower lifetime tax liability than with today's income tax. I think, Hank, that you are making this claim based on the Bush presidential panel on tax reform, or the comments of a fact check report back in 2007. Both of these reports have been reviewed by Americans for Fair Taxation and adequately rebutted for making claims based on data not attributed to the fair tax. In both cases, they made their own assumptions on what the fair tax does and how it works that led to the inaccurate results. And an aside benefit that has come to me, with the fair tax will stop cold corporate inversion. That in itself will create a vacuum for business and investment in America, which means more jobs and more consumption, and avoids having to raise taxes on all of us to support Social Security and Medicare as it will be needed to be supported. So with the bottom line being the growth of the economy as a whole because of the vacuum for business and investment that the fair tax provides, we won't have to be raising taxes, but we'll have a surplus of taxes. Social Security and Medicare will be well funded, and America will be on a path to a very, very bright and rosy future, and once again, the envy of the world. Mark?
Yeah, that's pretty thorough, Larry. Thank you for that information. So I'm going to move through the rest of our special topic here, which is straightforward, and then we'll rock and roll with the rest of your questions. So stay with us, everyone. Back to seniors. The fair tax delivers a tax holiday on IRAs and other tax-deferred plans. So if you put money into an investment, if you put pre-tax money into an investment, which many people do, and under our current tax system, when you take that money out, it gets taxed. Well, when the fair tax gets passed, it would come out untaxed, and that's why we call it a tax holiday. There'd be a huge benefit there. So you can sell your home and pay no capital gains taxes. That's cool. That's really important to many seniors. We end the gift and estate taxes and all the complex tax planning and costs associated with tax preparation right now when that happens. It ensures Social Security soundness by funding it with the national retail sales tax. We talked about that already, because you can purchase used goods. You can choose what you deem as a living essential. As well as you'll get the prebate that comes back to you that untaxes you up to the poverty level limit. That's a new revenue stream into your household every single month. And your average lifetime tax goes down. So Larry spoke to that as well. So, you know, and some of these benefits in here are a benefit to everyone. But the bottom line is seniors, as well as everyone else in the country, really benefit from the fair tax, and it's important to see that. All right, one thing that I'm going to bring up on the screen here is what we call the 1040 Club. And I'm just going to move through this just before I get to your question. So you can go to fairtax.org /1040. And if the fair tax calls to you and inspires you, well, then get committed to it. And one way you can get committed to it is by contributing dollars every month, $10.40, and it's really simple, right? I mean, that's a couple of cups of coffee each month, and it's like, if we had this in mass, then it would make a huge difference to our ability to get out there and have a media presence and have a lobby presence and influence our elected officials on a much greater scale. So please consider contributing to the fair tax, certainly through the 1040 Club. And now we want to answer the rest of your questions. All right. Oh, wow, we've got a lot of them. All right. A couple questions about candidates. Who's the supporter? So yes, Mike Huckabee has been a very verbal and documented supporter of the fair tax. That is true. Do we know of any other candidates right now, Larry, that are supporters of the fair tax, documented supporters?
Yes, we do. There are none. They're all rhinos or socialists.
Right. Okay, this question comes in from Wally, who has another real estate question. If one buys a new house at a certain price, how is the value of the land separated so it isn't part of the fair tax? I don't think that would be the case, Wally, just like it isn't now. Like when you buy, of course, if you're doing new construction, you buy land and then you build your house on it, and those two can be separated out. But for most Americans, when they buy a new home, the land's included in that, and they own the land. And I assume, although I could be wrong, that that's how it'll be done under the fair tax, that the land would just be a part of the house, and you'd buying that as one package, and it wouldn't be separated out. Any different point on that, Larry?
Yeah, that the value of the land may not be separated now. It's been a long time since I have. Well, it's not been that long, but the last houses I purchased, I did find that the property appraiser's office had a value of the land as well as a value of the dwelling or dwellings themselves. So it is separated there. And I don't see any reason why it would not be separated when it comes time to tax that sale of a new house, because all you're buying is the new not the property. The property's old. All you're buying is the new dwelling, and whatever it costs to produce that house, and of course the labor and profit that the builder would get on that. So I would not agree with you totally in that regard, Mark.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. So Frank wrote in, because we've had a lot of real estate questions, that he's aware that there are many thousands of dollars in embedded taxes in the cost of building a new home. True. The fair tax eliminates all of those. I believe prices will remain very close to the same. Thank you, Frank. So we've covered that. Ralph wants to know how many people are on the webinar. 123, Ralph. Thank you. So let's address this, Larry. I'll start. This is from Richard, and so there's this misunderstanding and misperception around prices. Richard writes in, why would I want to pay 23% more on money, and I think you mean with money, that I have saved from income that I have already paid income tax on? Yeah, we got it, Richard. So look, you have a perception that when the fair tax gets implemented, prices are going to go up by 23%. And that's not true. We've already discussed that that's actually not what happened. The prices are going to go up by 10 or maybe 12 or 14% in the first year. And to Alice's point, who asked, what about projections down the road? They're going to come down. Why? Because businesses are going to become more competitive, because we're going to have a a more fertile economic environment. What do businesses do when they want to capture more business and market share? They lower their prices. So prices are going to come down, and to be clear, you're not paying 23% more. Prices are going to go up by maybe 10 to 15% in the first year, then come down. And what you're also failing to take into consideration is that you do not pay any more capital gains or income taxes on any of your income from investments or anything else. And the prebate will be a new revenue stream that comes into your household, and you can purchase used goods. Financially, Richard, you are in a better place with the fair tax. So if that isn't clear, please write back in. Are there any special circumstances around the fair tax for farmers and agriculture, Larry? Asked Shirley.
Not that I am aware of. They won't see anything different other than they do not have to file an income tax return again, as no one else in America will. They'll receive the prebate if they meet the qualifications, which are simple enough, and they probably will. As far as any benefits they might get from the government, that's the spending side or the budget side of the coin. We're discussing the revenue side. So the only thing they will realize are the same benefits that the rest of us realize. If they're taking a pension out of a 401 or an IRA, it won't be taxed. If they're still working and making enough income, their Social Security won't be taxed. All of those things we had talked about previously for most of us will also apply to the farmers. Mark?
Yeah. Thank you, Larry. Hey, Larry, from Don. In addition to repealing the 16th Amendment, will there be a need to pass a constitutional amendment to institute the fair tax?
Absolutely not. Just like the income tax and every other tax that the government has issued, the Constitution already authorizes them to tax as they see fit. And it was only the 16th Amendment that allowed them to tax incomes from whatever source. So repealing the 16th Amendment will get rid of the taxing on income. Otherwise, the legislation itself, H.R. 25 in the House, S, like in SAM 155 in the Senate, they are both identical pieces of legislation. Once that is passed, the fair tax is in play. Mark?
Thank you, Larry. Alice has written in a couple times about her concern about the impact on oil prices and what people pay at the pump. So look, let me say to you, Alice, that the fair tax doesn't directly have any impact on oil prices. Now, they would be, so any gas station is a business, and they would be subject to the same factors that any other business owner is. And so they may choose to raise their prices to offset any shift that they see as they implement the fair tax. So let's say prices go up by 15%. So your point is that if people see prices at the gas pump go up quite a bit, they're going to start to be scared or have anxiety about it. Well, there's two things that I would say about it. Number one is education. We've got to educate people that they're in a better financial position. And number two, they're going to realize that when they take home 100% of their paycheck and when the prebate comes into their household every month. So, that's just a cold, hard fact. And you couple those points with education, and if the fair tax or any major tax reform like this gets implemented, we're going to have to do some serious education. And, to Ralph's question, why such lack of support? Well, how do we get it? We educate. And so you go, okay, well, how do we do that? Well, here's one way we're doing it, through this webinar. I mean, what would stop each and every person on this line to go send an email and to 10 of their buddies and post on Facebook to come to next webinar in January, the fourth Thursday of the month, and go get educated on it? Like, if that happened, it would be the best pyramid scheme in the history of pyramid schemes, because we would educate the masses. And so that's what we need to do. But back to Alice, your question, there is no direct impact on oil prices other than the potential gradual increase or marginal increase in the overall cost, or excuse me, in the overall price. But people are going to be in a much better financial spot anyway, and so it really isn't going to be an impact. Anything else on that, Larry?
Yes, it's just another reminder. It is always important to remember and to remind whomever you're speaking with, Alice, that before the fair tax is added to the cost of a product or a service, the embedded costs, the average 22%, is removed. And actually, this research showed that the costs embedded range from 20 to 25%. And things like services being insurances and financial transactions, medical services and things of that nature, they're all at the 25% level. Construction is at the 25% level of embedded costs. So those costs go down before the fair tax gets added. And it's, once again, it's important to remember and to remind whomever you're talking with that the cost goes down before the fair tax gets added. Mark?
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, say, look, think about it. If you could say to somebody who's concerned about prices, at the end of the day, at its most simplest form, okay, let's say prices go up by 15% or 17%. It's like the highest I've ever heard of somebody estimating it. But you're taking home a minimum increase in 29%, and you've got the prebate, and you can buy used goods. Do you agree that you're in a better financial position? I mean, like, that's just simple math, right? You know, one number outweighs the other. So that's one way to handle that in a really, really simple way. Ron Malero pointed out, which is really great when we talked about farms, that no estate tax is levied when the farm is sold, and that's a big benefit as well. Thank you, Ron. All right. Shouldn't we stop saying take home 100% of their paycheck when they're still paying state income tax? It's inaccurate, makes people suspicious. I could see why you're saying that, Curtis. Thank you for your comment. Yeah, fair point. And for me, it's like there's no payroll tax withholding and there's no federal tax withholding. And living in a state without any state sales tax, that's I guess I'm immune to that.
State income
Larry, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, it's state income tax. No state income tax, not no state sales tax.
Sorry, state.
Yeah, you know what? And Curtis, if you do the math, you'll find that taking the 22.65% increase in take-home pay, if you divide that number by whatever your net income is now, if you have deductions other than just withholding Social Security, Medicare, which is where the 29.28% comes from, if you have any other deductions, the actual increase in take-home pay jumps tremendously because that net number becomes lower. So your percentage of increase is a lot higher that way. It's interesting, but play with the numbers and you'll say, oh wow, that's pretty cool. Mark?
Yeah, and same thing from Curtis, who also positively acknowledges that the fair tax is gaining more visibility each election cycle. Fair tax is getting aired more and influencing other candidates, and that's encouraging. And you're right. Thank you, Curtis. All right. Who will be responsible for sending all those rebates to prebate check to 100 million people every month? That's what Richard writes in. Is that Social Security Administration, Larry, that's going to handle those direct deposits?
Yes, it is. Even though the fair tax itself will be administered by the states, and the states will also administer the applications for the prebate checks will actually be done by somebody who's got more experience than anyone in the world in sending out checks, money, to Social Security Administration. Mark?
Yeah. Since the current chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee is a FairTax sponsor, is there any thought that the FairTax will be on the committee's agenda?
That's being worked on. In fact, Steve Hayes, who is the president and CEO of Americans for Fair Taxation, has a 1-hour scheduled appointment with Mr. Brady, and that will be the discussion indeed. So yes, we have high hopes that it will be. Mark?
Yep. Thank you. All right. Yeah, let's do this. Thank you, Frank. Okay, so I want to shift everybody to the screen here, and here's ways to get involved. And we've got more questions. We're going to answer them, but I want to get to this. So you go to fairtax.org or flfairtax.com. That's the Florida FairTax site. These are both really a wealth of information and resources. The points that I got for today's special topic, right on fairtax.org. So give your time, volunteer, start a group, like really get involved, guys. That's as important as your money. Bring people to this webinar, 4th Thursday of every month. Go to flfairtax.com and you can get registered there. PopVox, really brilliant and important website. So PopVox is a website that aggregates and lists all of the legislation that currently exists in Congress. And it allows we, the citizens, to look at it and put a thumbs up or a thumbs down and make comments to determining whether we support legislation or not. And HR 25 is in there, and S155. So go to popvox.com and search for HR 25 and S155 and vote in favor of it. And thank you, Frank, for reminding us for that. FairTax Power Radio, soundcloud.com. You can listen to, who is it? Who's doing that? Is it Ron still? And who else is co-hosting?
Ron Malero and his sidekick, and I don't recall his name.
Well, there's two great guys that do it. One we know they're both great supporters, and one we can remember, it's Ron, and we're sorry for the other individual that we were forgetting, but they do a great job. All right, and you can give money at the fairtax.org/1040. We already mentioned that, or flfairtax.com /donate. So these are ways that you can get involved, and we wanted to make sure we mentioned that before people started checking out on us. So let's finish up on our questions here. We've got about 10 more to go, and then we'll wrap it up here, guys. All right. Yeah, Alice, you went to PopVox. You need to go to PopV with a V, Vox. Thank you. Okay, one point that never gets mentioned enough. Oh, thank you, Frank. He wants us to mention the fact that the fair tax, the consumption tax, spreads the tax base out more than the income tax does. We spoke to that earlier in the presentation, but I'll say it again. Instead of 50% of Americans paying taxes, 100% do. It's very, very progressive, meaning you only pay the amount of tax depending on what you spend. So you spend a little bit, you pay a little bit. You spend a lot, pay a lot in taxes. Very progressive.
And we're also helped by the visitors to this country, some 60 million a year, as well as the underground economy, which is not paying any tax now because they just don't file. Mark?
Yep. Thank you. All right. Let's see. Don asked, other than the prebate, how can I deal with criticism from those that say the sales taxes is regressive form of taxation? I just spoke to that. I think I covered that, Don. Like, the more you spend, the more you get taxed. The less you spend, the less you tax. Is there anything else you want to unpack about progressive versus regressive, Larry?
Now, the only other thing is that the wealthy people, because of their lifestyle, will pay more in taxes, even at the flat rate. And the fact that they may save more than they are today just means there's more money available for lending, which means even the lower income people have a better chance of getting a good low rate mortgage. It was projected by the research that mortgages mortgage rates would drop by a quarter of a percent, regardless of where they are at the time the fair tax is implemented. Mark?
Yep, thanks. All right. Cheryl wants to know, when do the House and Senate bill about the fair tax come up for a vote? I don't think it's to the floor yet, is it, Larry?
No, it's not, and it will come up to the House when the Ways and Means Committee sends it to the floor for discussion and a vote. And once the House passes it, then it will be up to the Senate to do the same thing. Their Finance Committee will send it to the floor, or they'll probably take well, it is the same as the House version, so the Finance Committee will send that bill to the floor, and they will debate and vote on it. And if both houses pass it, then it will go to the president for signature or veto. Mark?
Thank you. So this is from Tim. Is there any program to transition from old to fair tax? This would be to lower the impact. So we spoke to that earlier, Tim. I don't see a way to do this gradually. Now, that being said, there is something everybody would want to know about the transition for businesses. So those businesses with old inventory, up to $1 million of inventory in the first year, so the inventory that they still have on hand on the first day that we switch to the fair tax, for the next year, they've got up to $1 million to sell that without having to collect fair tax on it. So that's one way that the transition will work to sort of soften the blow, so to speak. Also, Larry, how would funds from pre-tax IRA and after-tax Roth funds be treated?
Pre-tax IRAs, as we had mentioned previously, will not be taxed under the fair tax. And yeah, pre-tax savings that are in IRAs, they will not be taxed. If it's income, it's not taxed. You could ask the question about anything in your life. If it has anything to do with income, it will not be taxed. And what was the second part of that, Mark?
You got it.
Okay, back to you.
Let's see. Farmers sell commodities, corn and beans. Will they need to charge tax on their production? Then they need to forward that tax to the federal government. So they don't charge tax on the production, but when they sell beans and corn and anything to consumers, then we will pay that fair tax at the cash register, and those businesses will collect it and yes, pass it on to the federal government.
Just clarify that, Mark. You said when they sell it to the consumers, which is exactly right, but what that also states is that there are no business-to-business taxing under the fair tax. So when the farmer sells to a wholesaler or to a supermarket, they will not be collecting tax and the supermarket will not be paying tax, but the supermarket will collect the tax from the consumer. The only thing that is taxed are sales to the end consumer. Mark?
Yeah. Consider someone who's in the lawn care business paid in cash. What controls will ensure the fair tax collected will be forwarded? So anybody who's got a business license, so when I get my business, I have to register with my state. The Florida State of, oh, I can't remember, Department of, I can't think of the name of it. But yeah, anybody with a business license who has a number and they're registered as a business will be responsible for collecting the fair tax, and that's pretty easy for to be policed, because it's like, okay, well, what were your gross receipts, and multiply that times 23%, and that's what you've got to send into the federal government. And you know, the Girl Scout open a lemonade stand at the end of her driveway isn't going to have to collect the fair tax. but anybody with a business license will do that, and that will be one of the primary mechanisms to ensure the proper amount gets collected and then forwarded. Let's see. Yes, internet sales will be taxed. That's a new product or a service. So that's, thank you, Joseph. Thanks for reminding us of that. Let's see. What else do we have here? So Alice, your connection to foreign oil is fascinating. What about my assertion that the fair tax would eventually lead to us eliminating our dependence on foreign oil? Would that occur simply because we gain a stronger financial position globally? Is there anything else that would directly lead to this? Am I wrong? Would we always remain dependent on foreign oil? This is a major factor to me in the efficacy of the fair tax. Well, you know, like I said, the benefit of the fair tax is that it will prop up our economy. It will bring in more money into our federal government. Will it have a direct impact on foreign oil? You know, I think the fair tax is certainly not a direct factor in that. You know, that's, in my opinion, more related to how each individual and the aggregate of individuals choose to put gasoline in their car. But I think you got your answer on that one. So I don't know if, Larry, there's anything else you want to speak to on that, but I think we've covered it.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, from Alice, let's see. What happens to tax-exempt status of charities and churches? Since we basically all become tax-exempt, does that status become null and void? Well, correct. There's nothing to write off because there's no income tax to write off against, Alice. But there is something really valuable to point out here. I'm glad you brought this up, is that people ask, well, since we're not going to be able to deduct charitable donations against income taxes anymore, will that go down? And quite the opposite. It's going to go up. And there was a great study done that said, you know, why do people contribute and donate to charity? And the answer isn't because they get tax deductions. It's because they believe in a cause that is worthy. And so the more disposable income they have to contribute, the more opportunity they'll have to contribute more money to the charities that they support. So absolutely going to be a boom for charities. Thank you. Is it possible to get a copy of this? Yes, you can. Just reply to the follow-up email you get and ask for it, and we'll send it to you. We're not going to do a December webinar because of Christmas. It'll be the fourth Thursday of January. That'll be the next one. Thank you for asking. Curtis says, the impact and the effect that the fair tax will have on the immigration issue. Please discuss this. Larry, do you want to speak to any impact the fair tax will have on immigration?
I presume you're talking about illegal immigration. It won't have any effect on legal immigration as long as those people who are here legally have a legal residence and a social security account. But the illegals, they won't have a legal residence and they won't have a social security account. But if they're missing either one of those, they will not get the benefit of the prebate, which means their cost of living will go up to 23% or 30%, depending on how you want to calculate it, on the first dollar they spend. Many of those, we believe, will deport themselves. The others will just buckle down and live on less spendable income because they're paying more in taxes and they don't have that prebate benefit. Mark?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I think we've done it, Larry. So look, we want to thank all of you for staying with us tonight and going 20 minutes over our hour, but your questions were great. We loved your engagement, and you know, we just appreciate you being here. Our request is that you'll consider joining the 1040 Club. and that you'll come back in January on the fourth Thursday and you'll bring your friends and go promote it. Go send an email. Go get involved. Go make a difference. If this calls to you, don't let it be something that everybody else does. Make it something that you do. And one of the things that Larry and I talk about a lot that's really important is there's a magic number called 3,000. And when 3,000 people in every voting district in the country can communicate to their elected officials that they support the fair tax, that is the magic number that has a politician pick their head up and go, yeah, I got to pay attention to this. We can do that, guys. We can do that. So have a great Thanksgiving and Christmas. Thank you for being here. Tell your friends, open your mouth, get educated, join the 1040 Club, come back in January on the fourth Thursday, and we wish all you a happy, healthy holiday. Thank you for being here tonight.
Mark.
Good night, everybody.
Mark, did you answer the question about the VAT? Hello? Okay, if you're still on, I don't know if Mark is still listening. Don asked about being confused, people criticizing the fair tax as a VAT. A VAT is taxed at every step in the chain between the originator of a product or service and the seller to the end consumer. And the tax rate is not necessarily the same at each step of the way. It's a complex system and it is easy to manipulate. Whereas the sales tax, our sales tax, is only taxed at the cash register sale to the end consumer. That's it for tonight. Thank you very much, guys. Mark did a great job tonight also. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.